This happened to me in summer 2014. My friend and I, we'll call him Josh, have always been fans of hiking and the great outdoors. We're from Salem, Oregon, so we were no strangers to nature. We spent many a weekend camping in Mount Hood National Forest, hiking all day, getting drunk and high all night, more often than not by a primitively made campfire. This day takes place on a hike in Washington's Mount Ranier National Park. We drove up the night before and crashed at a hotel 40 minutes away from the park. First thing in the morning we were up. I slept like shit due to Josh's phone vibrating on the dresser with texts from his girlfriend all night. She had trust issues, and I couldn't blame her for that, but I could blame her for a lousy night's sleep. After a waffle, some crappy eggs, and a cup of coffee from the hotel breakfast buffet, we were off. We drove into the southeast entrance of the park and decided on a trail that began across from the historic center. The hike started out easy and slightly downhill with a stroll through an old-growth forest. The sun had been out a few hours, and it felt nice peering through the trees onto our backs. Take in mind this was early summer, so there was plenty of snow on many of the trails in the park, and it was still a little chilly this high up in elevation. This trail was pretty clear, all things considered. The trail then branched off into another and began zigzagging at a sharp incline, like some huge pain-in-the-ass staircase of Mother Nature. After a few more zigs and zags, we decided that this trail was no longer enjoyable, and elected to go back to the car and find a better hike. Get back to the car and head towards the Reflections Lake area. After a little driving, Josh spots a trailhead beginning just off the road, and I park the car at the next pull-off a quarter-mile up. I don't know the name of the trail. It was just marked with that little blue sign with the hiker on it. Upon entering, it was apparent that this trail was much more heavily snow-covered and was pitched about 30 degrees upward in elevation. Although the trail hadn't been cleared and wouldn't be yet considered accessible for the season, we had good boots on, so it didn't look like something we couldn't handle. We were two relatively experienced hikers in our late 20s and had been through worse. The hike here was difficult, but much more intriguing than the last. We passed beautiful runoffs that emptied into pools of glistening mountain water, while the sounds of woodpeckers and various wildlife living in the trees provided the soundtrack to our hike. This area was pretty cool, but it was quickly becoming not worth it anymore. Time to turn around, again. Like I mentioned before, this area was heavily snow-covered and we couldn't see the trail. We just figured that since we went straight up, that we would go straight down. It's not like we even covered that much ground, only around a mile, and we weren't making any turns. We tried following our footprints, but there were indentations and depressions as well as what looked like old footprints from previous hikers made in the snow along the way we had been going. We were able to follow back our snow prints for only a minute or two before we completely lost track. It's very difficult to describe what the ground looked like here. There were just rows of divots where the snow had fallen and condensed, scattered footprints and indents, and these divots branched out all down the mountain. I know this sounds stupid, but going up it didn't seem like it would be easy to get lost. It's a really scary feeling when you're out in the wilderness encompassing hundreds of thousands of acres and all of a sudden you don't know the way back. I clearly remember the pit I had in my stomach trudging down the mountain, second-guessing our every move. How did this not look familiar? We were just here, minutes ago. Right about this time, I noticed that I didn't hear Josh's footsteps coming from behind me anymore. He had been keeping pace around 15 feet behind my back. I turn around, and he is nowhere in sight. "Josh!" I shouted. Nothing. If he had needed to pee, he would have just turned around and went. "Josh! Quit playing around, dude. I'm not in the mood for this shit right now." Silence. "Okay, this is fucked," I said out loud. I started scanning the area wildly for any signs of movement, and almost right away I see snow fall off a few branches on a tree a few paces behind me. Then some more. The tree appeared to be moving. I got there as quick as I could and started digging. Josh was upside down, fallen into a tree well. I dug out his feet, then started on his legs, which he was kicking frantically. I was able to leverage my leg against a large fallen branch, and I pulled with all my might until his head was exposed. He was panting, panicked, and crying. He was so cold that he wasn't offering me much help to get him right-sided. After we were both safely away from the tree, he removed his jacket and frantically began shaking snow out of his clothes. I took off both of my hoodies and gave them to him to warm up. He explained to me through short breaths that he had held onto a branch from a tree for leverage and slipped on a log when he stepped on it and fell upside down and backwards. He said that the snow was pressing onto his body, and had he been down there another minute, he would have suffocated. We really needed to get back to the car. But which way was the car? After giving him a minute to settle, we figured that if we don't get to the road the way that we're going in the next 15 minutes or so, we're going to stay put and try to alert anyone happening to be in earshot with as much noise as possible. After 15 minutes and no road in sight, that's exactly what we did. We shouted for help as loud as we could, all while checking our phones for service that we weren't going to get every few seconds. Hours pass. It was 3 o'clock. Josh wanted to keep going downhill towards the left, but I was convinced that we would get truly lost if we kept going. Another hour passes. Another hour of yelling. 4 o'clock. Less people in the park now. I can't accurately describe the feeling I felt. We hadn't even gone that far, but at the same time it felt like we traveled halfway across the park and nothing looked familiar. Desperation set in. I'm looking through my backpack, eyeing the last power bar we had, when I think I hear something in the distance. After straining our ears, we're able to tell that it's a call. It's a person calling out, "Hello!" We start screaming for help. Josh screams. 10 seconds later, I scream, taking turns. Our voices had far less power than they did hours ago, and my throat has never been so sore in my life. After what seemed like a really long time, the voices started sounding a little closer. At this point, our vocal cords were completely shot and we physically couldn't shout anymore. We both found decent-sized branches and started bashing them against a tree to keep the noise going. Finally, we hear footsteps approach. It's 2 park rangers. They had been looking for us for hours after they were contacted about cries for help by a fellow hiker. They radioed in the other members in the search party and led us back towards the road. Somehow we wound up 12 miles away from our car. I swear there was no way we hiked more than a mile or two in any direction. I had heard of people going missing and being found nowhere near where they were last seen, but I never imagined that what we went through could equate to something like that. It was as if we walked through a portal and teleported to another section of the park. I still deal with paranoia, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress from this experience. Had it been explained away, I may have been able to cope, but I've spent countless hours and days thinking about that day and retracing our steps, and I know that what happened just isn't possible. It can't be. But that's what happened. I fell out of touch with Josh over the last couple of years, and have since turned into something of a homebody.
This story takes place 3 years ago in Mount Ranier National Park. My boyfriend Drew and I were on one of our first trips together. We flew into PDX with our sights set out on exploring Mount Hood and Mount Rainier, checking out some hot springs and frequenting downtown Portland for some good street food and all the good stuff we heard about the city. Needless to say, we were in for a lot of driving. One of the first places we went was Mount Ranier National Park. We were there mid-August, so the crowds were in full effect. When you're in the vast outdoors, it's nice to know that you won't be alone on the trails, but if you've ever been in a national park when it's packed to the gills, then you know that It isn't the ideal situation when wanting to get away from it all and return to nature. We hiked the Panorama Point Trail, a 5-mile loop trail that took us through beautiful fields of wildflowers and up to a spectacular view of the Cascades. It was hot, but very enjoyable. Now, when we had gotten into the parking lot for Skyline Panorama Point, surprise, surprise, there was nowhere to park. So we were forced to park on the shoulder of a one-way road, past about a half-mile worth of cars parked the same direction. Upon exiting, it was apparent that there was no way to turn around that was remotely safe, so we just drove straight, thinking that we would eventually be led to a connecting road that would lead us back out the way we came in. We thought wrong. This was one of the first national parks either of us had been to, so we didn't yet know the deal on how there is generally only one road that you can take to get to opposing sides of the park. To skip the boring details, we were stuck on this road for hours. Never a bar of cell phone service on either of our phones, and even more concerning, we were running low on gas. Sounds stupid, I know, but we had plenty coming in, and it was only supposed to take us 20 minutes to get out of the park the way we came in. Fewer cars were passing us along the winding road, and the beautiful vastness of the park was now seeming more ominous and intimidating. Were we actually going to run out of gas in the middle of the wilderness? Now this started to become a much more pressing situation. We knew we needed to get directions or some kind of help from someone. We eventually got to an intersection, and as luck would have it, there was a truck pulled off of the road with 2 people inside. My boyfriend rolled down the window and got their attention. It was 2 men, and it appeared as if we interrupted an argument they were having, because they looked upset and a little startled upon Drew getting their attention. His tone was desperate, and he mentioned that we needed to get to a gas station, that we had been driving for hours, and we needed directions. The driver paused for a moment, then casually gave us directions out of the park. He said something like, "Take a left right here, then a right at the next road you come across, and that will lead you into the nearest town, and you can get gas over there and be on your way." We thanked them, said they were a godsend, and took the left. The road was long and winding, no sign of civilization after 2 miles. Where was this right that we were supposed to make? 10 more miles, and now we're worried. "Okay," he said. "If we don't see this road in the next 2 miles, we're turning back and waiting by the intersection for another car for directions or a phone or something." I'm growing increasingly concerned about those 2 men who gave us directions. There was nothing that appeared to be leading us towards a town, and there was nobody around here. In about another mile we come to the road. We take the right and keep driving. I'm really anxious now because this is just wilderness and it was approaching dusk. After a few more minutes, we're sure now that these 2 were just some assholes that got their kicks off leading tourists off in the wrong direction. But why would they do that? They knew we were running out of gas. We decided to turn around, and in the process, the gas light turns on. The scenario of us running out of gas miles from nowhere with no cell phone service was becoming a reality. After getting back to the road, making a left and driving for a while, the low gas alarm on the rental car was sounding more and more frequently. Drew wanted to keep driving instead of finding a more appropriate spot to pull off. He kept repeating how these newer cars should have gas in the reserves. The next time the warning alarm sounded, the engine sputtered. Shit! This was it. We pulled to the side of the road as the engine bucked and went dead. It was lucky that we even had a spot to pull over that wasn't directly in traffic, since many backcountry roads in Washington are 1 or 2-way roads with sheer drop-offs. We're pissed, tired, arguing with each other. After giving each other the silent treatment for a while, I see a noticeable look of concern on his face. What if those guys wanted to lead us all the way out here, and what if they come for us? Everybody has guns around here, and they look like hunters. I was already worried about that in the back of my mind, and now it was starting to seem like it might happen. Just like that, we wanted to get away from the car. We were exposed, and we didn't want to be sitting ducks. We grabbed our backpacks and hoodies and hiked a few hundred feet away from the road. It was dark now, and the ground was moist at our feet. We settled somewhat obscured in the underbrush. I tried to squat, but the weight of my backpack made me lose balance, and I fell backwards and soaked the seat of my pants on the wet grass. This sucks. After a while of being here, this started to feel stupid. What the hell were we doing out here? This is bad enough. Why don't we just go back to the car? Just then we see headlights coming over the ridge. Truck headlights. There had only been a few cars that passed us on this road while we were on it. It drives past our cars slowly, continues a couple 100 feet, turns around, then pulls up behind us. It's the same truck. Now, we are terrified. The driver gets out and approaches the car. He looks in and says something indiscernible to the other man. He gets out. They stay by their truck, fooling with something in the back seat. The glow of a flashlight appears, and then another. "Go!" Drew says in a whisper. We slowly get up and start walking deeper into the woods. We can barely see anything, and know we can't turn the flashlights on our phones. The men are closer to us now, but started walking in a direction further away. We walked as slow and quietly as we could, but knew that they would hear us if they got any closer. With nothing but the dim moonlight to guide us, we found a large tree that had fallen over and broken apart. We stashed our backpacks under one part of the trunk and hid under another wider section, practically inside of the trunk. We heard the men get closer and further away. Footsteps, the shine of a flashlight dancing off the forest floor nearby, and then silence. We laid under that tree trunk for 2 hours before we decided to move. Drew got out to check if the coast was clear. He told me to stay here and that he would be right back. I didn't want him to leave me here all alone, and I didn't want these deranged backwoods hillbillies to find him either. After what felt like an hour but was probably only a few minutes, Drew came back and said that the truck was gone. We stayed there all night and naturally didn't sleep for a minute. When morning came, we felt safe enough to head towards the road. Cars were passing every several minutes. As we approached the car, we saw that all 4 tires had been slashed. Drew made me hide on the other side of the road a few feet into the trees as he waited for someone to flag down. After about a half hour, an old man pulls over because Drew basically ran into the road, forcing him to stop. He explains what happened, and by the tone of his voice, it seemed like the old man was scared and was about to drive away. Drew calls for me to come out, and when the old man saw me, the look of fear on his face turned to concern and surprise. He agreed to drive us into the nearest town to get something to eat and call a tow truck. The nearest town was 20 miles in the opposite direction of where we were driving last night. We luckily had paid for roadside assistance on the rental, though we did have to pay for the tires. I don't know what those men's intentions were, but had we been in that car when they showed up,
I may not have lived to recount this story. I haven't been to another national park since.